Now, every year, his parents went to Jerusalem for the festival of the Passover. And when Jesus was 12 years old, they went up as usual for the festival. When the festival was ended and they started to return, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem, but his parents did not know it. Assuming that he was with the group of travelers, they went a day's journey. Then they started to look for him among their relatives and friends. And when they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem to search for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard him were amazed at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw them, they were astonished, and his mother said to him, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been searching for you in great anxiety." And he said to them, "Why were you searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my father's house?" But they did not understand what he said to them. Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them. And his mother treasured all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in years and in divine and human favor. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
You may be seated. Good morning, and Merry Christmas. Happy first Sunday of Christmas. Even though we already celebrated Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, the season is not quite over yet. No, today marks the first and this year the only Sunday of Christmas. Next week, January 6th, we will celebrate the Epiphany, or the coming of the Magi to visit the baby Jesus and his parents, but that's next week. This week, it's still Christmas. And it's sort of an odd place to be, really, I think, this first Sunday of Christmas. You know, we spent the whole season of Advent preparing for the birth that we celebrated on the 24th. And we gathered on Christmas Eve, and the culmination of that preparation with candles, celebrating the coming of Christ. And here we are, 6 days later, still in the season of Advent, already having marked and celebrated Christ's birth, but not yet moving on to the next liturgical season of the year. No, we get to sit in this time, this one and only Sunday of Christmas. And so at this point, we've heard a lot of what we call the birth narratives of Jesus. All the drama that precedes Jesus' birth and the actual event itself and all of the visitors that come after he's born. But today we also get something quite a little different. This, I think, is the only time in the church year where we see Jesus as a 12-year-old. Not a baby, but also not yet an adult. And, well, what does 12-year-old Jesus do but get lost? Well, or his parents can't find him. And especially on the anxiety of a travel day or a travel period. My mind is brought to airport travel when I was that age. And, you know, at 12 years old, we're like smart enough to read the signs and to kind of figure out where we're going, but not patient enough to want to wait for our family as they go through security, as they get through the lines. And so I was always in a hustle and bustle, but much to my parents' own anxiety. Well, but it's hard for me to imagine exactly how Mary and Joseph felt, traveling an entire day on foot back to Jerusalem, searching for their only child, who was no longer a baby, but not quite an adult, maybe even if you wanted to believe he was. No, I'm not a parent, so it is hard for me, or it's impossible for me to imagine exactly what that must have been like. And the closest thing I've ever come to that was losing sight of a camper when I was a counselor at camp. I worked at Marlou Ridge in Maryland, and I never full out lost a camper. which would have prompted a lost camper drill, which basically shuts down the camp, and all of the available staff go to their appointed grounds looking for this child, and it does not stop until the child is found. Now, thankfully, that never happened while I was working there at all. But I did lose sight of 3 boys once, about that same age, 12 years old, at this big gathering. Every evening, all of the campers and all of the counselors would come together. And so this crowd of about 150 people, I lost sight of these 3 boys who were from the city, and they'd never really spent any time in the forests. And when I couldn't place them, my own anxiety reached a new level. It seemed like hours, but it couldn't have been more than a few minutes. But when I did find them, as calm as can be, just on the other side of that big crowd of people, I said to them, "Where did you go?" And they said, "We were here all along." In their own 12-year-old heads, the logic couldn't have been clearer. Of course, I was here. Where else could I have been? Why were you even searching for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house? Of course. Of course. The writer of Luke's gospel makes this subtle comparison of boy Jesus with boy Samuel. The appointed Old Testament text for today comes from 1 Samuel chapter 2. And Samuel is also about this same age, 12 years old. And he's already an apprentice of sorts in the temple, learning to be a priest when he becomes of age. And before his own miraculous birth, his mother, Hannah, makes a vow to the Lord that says her son would be devoted to or consecrated to the Lord. And she keeps her vow, and she raises Samuel in the temple under the direction of the priest Eli. And the reading paints Samuel as still a child, 12 years old, but wise beyond his years, ministering before the Lord in priestly garments made with love and care by his mother. And he would grow up to be a very important prophet and reformer in Israel, ushering in change that people were begging for, all with the word of God in his ear, ultimately leading to the crowning of King David, of whom Joseph would be a descendant of. And so I don't think at all that it's a coincidence that the writer of Luke's gospel wants to make this comparison between Jesus and Samuel, even in their adolescence. In fact, I think it was very important to the gospel writers to associate the Christ child, even as a child, with the Hebrew prophets and the Torah. So we get a glimpse of Jesus learning from the law in the Torah into the temple while amazing those around him with his own questions and his own insights from the get-go. So there would be no question that this promised one, this Redeemer in his own right, would know and live the tradition from which he came. Jesus was a faithful Jewish boy raised by faithful Jewish parents, an image painted alongside another faithful Jewish boy, Samuel, raised by his own faithful Jewish parents. I think it's kind of fascinating when we're able to get a glimpse of our leaders or really important people as children, or as they were when they were children or teenagers. Usually looking back, we're able to see or notice some of those traits that would form them into the leaders they become. And often, our leaders are remembered, at least in image, if nothing else, how they were in adulthood. I tried to search for a painted depiction of Samuel as a 12-year-old, just to see. I was curious. And you can imagine my half second of shock when all of the pictures were of this old man with a long white beard, much less of a 12-year-old boy and more like Dumbledore. Too often, I think we wait for our leaders to enter into adulthood before we notice those qualities. that they're either overlooked or not quite taken seriously until adult society has deemed them an appropriate age. And really, that's a disservice not just to our youth, but to everyone. We deprive our whole communities of the benefits of that leader if we look past their gifts by the virtue of their age. Thinking about that, I was reminded of Emma Gonzalez, one of the survivors of the school shooting in Parkland, Florida. She has amassed quite a bit of fame in this last year, speaking out about what had happened, and speaking out and calling for reform specifically because of the lack of action taken by the adults around her, the leaders that are of that society-approved age of leadership. And in speaking out and in the manner in which she has spoken out, she has also been called wise beyond her years, a future leader in the world, inspiring other future leaders. But if we've learned nothing from boy Jesus and boy Samuel and even Emma, it's that our youth and our teens around us are leaders now. Not just future leaders, but leaders now, teachers now, even prophets now. And if all we do is look back on their youthful years and say to ourselves, look at the qualities they displayed at such young ages, wise beyond their years, I think we miss out in that moment of those gifts that they could have brought us, not just in the future. And that way of thinking, that recognizing the importance of our wise yet youthful leaders now, I think is pretty perfect for the first Sunday of Christmas. This time of looking back on the birth of Christ, and with that lens, knowing the events that will come forward, knowing that because of the birth of Jesus, we will have Jesus the healer, Jesus the teacher. We will explore the lessons that the disciples are taught. We will even be led to the cross because of this birth. But that's the future. Right now is Jesus as a 12-year-old. And we get this unique time to sit in that. We get to appreciate his youth and, dare I say, even know-it-all attitude of this present moment, beyond his birth, but not quite yet to his faded future, to the present, where God is breaking through to us, to the living promise of the Emmanuel. So before we move on, before we change gears into the next chapter of the church year, before we take down all of the beautiful Christmas decorations, let us take notice of what is happening around us now. Who is speaking up now, and what are they saying? Let's sit in that present moment where God breaks through our world to come to us, to be present among us in the gift of Jesus Christ in our lives. Because, well, of course. Though we too may share Mary and Joseph's anxiety at times, where else would we find God but in this place? Did we not know that God would be present among us? Well, of course. Merry Christmas.